Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Create Atlanta Mentorship. And in this video, we're going to go over the basics of credit. So this video is just a simple guide about credit for newbies. Now, I know that for the longest time, I had a lot of trouble uh, understanding credit just because I was so afraid of it. And I think one of the reasons why I was afraid of it is that I think in society, when people talk about credit, it's always in a fear-based language or tone. So you might have heard things like, oh my gosh, if your credit score isn't above a 750, then your life is over and you'll never be able to get a home or apartment or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And so I know that for the longest time, I was just too flat out afraid to learn about it. And I don't think I'm the only one because I see in this news article that 1 out of 7 people are afraid to see their credit report. And because there's so much fear-based language around it, I totally understand why. So we'll just kind of go over the basic concept of credit right now. So credit, according to a dictionary definition that I saw, um, it just says it's the ability to obtain goods, money, or services in return for a promise to pay at some later date. So, for example, let's say I order 100 computers. If I'm not buying on credit and I pay everything in cash, then I'm not going to pay at a later date. Whereas if I'm buying in credit, using credit, they'll give me the computers, but they might bill me and say, hey, I have to pay 30 days later, 60 days later, or 90 days later, or some other date. They call that net 30, 60, 90 terms, right? So anytime you get something and you pay for it at a later date, that's credit. So a credit card is you use the bank's money, but then you have to pay the bank some of the bank or some of the money you borrow to the bank at least 1 month later with interest if they do charge interest, right? But yeah, you do have to pay for something at a later date. And if you've never ever planned to borrow money, then or borrow, pay for anything at a later date, then you don't really have to care about credit. Sometimes I hear from people about how they're so worried about their credit, but they never plan to borrow money, right? Like, well, if you don't plan to borrow money or pay for things later, why do you care about credit? Because you don't, right? So you kind of be in like the Dave Ramsey camp where he would be like, you don't need a credit score. And I know some people say like, oh, well, you need it in order to rent an apartment. But I just know from experience that if you talk to a person, a live person, you explain your situation that, hey, I have good income, but I've never borrowed anything in my life, they'll probably let you rent an apartment, right? So, and that's the other thing too. I think people lack of basic understanding or fundamental understanding of credit because they're worried about it, but they don't plan to borrow money. And so why would you be worried about something in which like the purpose of that something doesn't concern you? It's weird, right? But people do that a lot with regards to credit. All right. Second thing I want to talk about is the fear-based language. Just get a little bit more into it. Now, I know for the longest time, as I said, before, um, I was totally afraid to learn about credit just because nobody just took my hand and walked me through just basic things about credit. It's always about how something bad was going to happen if I didn't, look at my credit report on, annualcreditreport.com or something. And you have to know what your credit score is. And if you don't, then, XYZ. And it's just more like, oh, I don't want to hear that. And I just feel like, if I'm ignorant to it, then maybe I'll be happier or something like that. I think that was my rationale. But I don't know why people use such negative language when it comes to credit. Credit is a tool, right? That's all it is a tool. If you ever plan to borrow money, then it's best that you would learn about it. But if you don't plan to borrow money, it's not going to affect you. But people always talk about it in this negative light that if you don't have it, it's the end of the world. All right. So next thing I want to briefly talk about is a credit report. So it's not an actual profile, but it's similar to doing kind of like a Google search in a giant database. And so there are many, many places that hold information about you with regards to how you make payments, whether you make payments or not. to maybe like credit cards or maybe your bills. The big three companies that, or they call them credit bureaus that hold that information are TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, right? And so when a lender runs a credit report, they're not actually looking at an actual profile they have on you, right? It's not like an actual like, hey, like, we hold a PDF file, or we hold a, I don't know, a Word file that contains all your information, and we know that this is you and this is the credit cards that you opened. What it is kind of a similar to a Google search in a giant database. So let's say that the lender um, is going to give you some sort of a loan, and they want to check how you've been doing paying your previous payments. They go to a credit bureau, and they're essentially running a search, and then they're pulling out things that they don't think is you. So there might be, someone who lives with you who has a very similar name and social security number, and if you meet the right criteria, um, that could essentially be your quote credit report. So just to, I know this is kind of nuanced, but it's you don't have an actual credit profile. Basically, the lender or the credit bureau is just running a search to all the giant data that they have that they think is you, right? So. Um, Now, I am going to show you a sample of, let's say, like, I'll call this a credit profile or credit score. But just be aware that there's many, many credit scoring models out there. So, you might have heard of FICO Vantage. There's a ton of more, but I'm just going to kind of go over the basics of what I would consider to be important. So the main important thing that, let's say, a credit score, and I think I'm mainly speaking mostly on FICO. I don't remember all the nuances. That a credit score would essentially measure, or what they're concerned about is if you're more than 90 days late on a payment. Now, there's other various factors as well, and then they give you a score, and I think the max is either 850, as you can see right here. But again, it depends on the model. But here's the thing: don't be too concerned about the score itself, right? There's a saying that I learned from an instructor, that a great instructor, and he said regarding credit, he said, "Hey, credit is a tool, not a trophy. So there are certain things that you will do that is there for the purpose of borrowing money. But sometimes many times when you borrow money or create a loan or get a loan, that's going to lower your credit score. And a lot of times people are afraid to use their credit because they'll be like, oh, well, if I borrow money, then, it's going to kind of ding my score down a few points. And it's like, okay, well, what was the point of borrowing having a good credit profile if you're never going to use it? And the analogy that he used was like, it's like, let's say you're a mechanic and then you have all these tools and they're bright and shiny and you never use them. Then what was the point of buying those tools, right? Every time we have a tool, we're going to use it, and if we borrow money, which is the whole point of credit, sometimes our score will go down. But let me just kind of give you a brief a glance of things that'll matter when it comes to your credit score. So if you have a variety of counts, that they consider that to be good. If your credit's been open for a while, they consider that to be good. No missed payments, they consider that to be good. Inquiries. So what's an inquiry? Every time you apply for a credit, every time you apply for a loan, then the lenders share that information with the credit bureaus. Because here's the thing: so let's say like I applied for 20 loans to 20 places. Don't you think that people want to know that? Like people want to know, like if I'm a lender, I'd like to know if the person I'm lending to has gotten maybe like 19 different credit cards like in 1 month or something like that, right? And then if they do have too many inquiries, then I'm not going to lend them because that's kind of like a red flag. Another thing is utilization. So if you use too much of your credit, like 100%, I'm not going to give you more money to borrow, right? You probably want to, they probably don't want it too low because they obviously want to make money off of interest when you borrow some money, but they don't want you to borrow the whole thing because it's like, well, what do you need that money for? I mean, it seems like if I give you more money, then that's kind of going to be like a risk. And also missed payment. So you don't ever really want to miss a payment, especially one that's 90 days late. So if you have a 90 days late payment, then your score based on the model will go down. But credit isn't really that hard. Again, one of the things that you should be aware of is that if you don't have income, regardless if you have a good credit profile, banks won't lend you money either. And there's a saying that says that I heard where it's like banks don't lend you money when you need it, right? So if you have good credit and you have good income, then it's best to get credit cards at the time that you don't need it, or lines of credit, or maybe even a loan if you need it for, like, I don't know, starting a business, right? Even if you have good income. Again, it's a tool based on what you need, but just be aware that banks only lend you money when really you don't need it. Okay. All right. So this is Korean Atlanta Mentorship. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment box below. If you're interested in joining our mentorship group, please go ahead and email us on the About Us section of the YouTube channel, or go ahead and click the Google form link below and fill out your information, and we'll give you, we'll send a correspondent back, and we'll set up a time to see if you're a good fit to join our group. All right, have a great day, everybody, and we will speak next time.